Hello everyone, producer Dave here, and welcome to another episode of Richard and Mike Do Food. This week the guys are talking about hearing from God, covering some stories from their own experience. Hope you enjoy.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Richard and Mike Do Food. It's good to be with you guys, to be speaking to our audience and to be spending time with Mike and producer Dave.
Producer Dave. Yes, hello everyone. It's lovely to be here again, chatting with you guys.
It is, it's good. So today we've got some houmous made by my wife, and we've got a variation of crackers and the ever exciting lettuce.
Homemade hummus.
Homemade hummus, yep. I actually just had a bit of an accident, so we were just setting everything up, and I had my, well actually it wasn't even on a plate, so I didn't put my stuff on a plate because I thought I'll just use a lid quickly because I didn't want to create more washing, as often that's generally what I go for in life.
Yeah.
And as Dave was setting everything up, I was trying to navigate myself and manoeuvre around this mic, and then I've just knocked my lid of food and it's gone to splat on the ground. But we've sorted that all out now. I've got a new plate.
Hummus side down.
Hummus side down.
Hummus side down, and there was just a big old dollop of hummus on the floor. And I've taken a picture, so maybe we can put it up on.
Yep, on Insta.
On Insta, and on one of the thumbnails or something.
Sounds great.
Yeah. Spent ages kind of organising the food on the table and taking nice photos with a nice bokeh background, and then splat. I think that's probably the photo we're going to end up with. Which would be good. What are we talking about today, Rich?
We're going to be talking about prayer, but I'm quite excited about the taste test.
Ah.
If we could go for that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Sorry, I've jumped the gun.
Don't worry. So, you might hear the crunch, you might hear the munching.
Last time it was like crunchy biscotti, wasn't it? So, I'm actually going to go with lettuce first. I don't know why I really like the look of this lettuce today.
I just had it with some crackers. It's really nice.
Oh, you've not often said about lettuce. Let's go.
Are you a lettuce fan now, Mike?
Oh, yeah, I like lettuce. It's like nature's crisps.
Yeah, so I was saying that we're going to be talking about prayer today, but actually when we were discussing this before, we thought actually we wouldn't call it prayer, we'd call it hearing God, because prayer is like a conversation, it's a two-way thing, and a lot of the time we get caught up in the whole thing of talking to God, and that's what a lot of people think of in terms of prayer. But after the episode on hope, one of my friends came back to me and he said that I made some kind of a throwaway statement about hearing God say something, and he said, how do you hear God? How do you know it was God? So that really prompted me to think, oh, actually, maybe let's talk about hearing God.
Yeah. Oh, it's a really interesting topic. I suppose if you're not used to that kind of idea, it's really odd. Like, it's really quite weird, isn't it, to think that you're hearing from, well, whoever you think God is, but the God of Jesus or the God who created the universe. To be able to actually hear from him, what does that really mean? Like, is it hearing him like you're listening to this podcast now, or we're talking to each other, or is it something different? Those are the kind of things that we wanted to kind of explore today, I guess.
Yeah, because I think we were designed to hear from God, and I think the word hear really doesn't do it justice, because hearing obviously talks about just with your ears, but actually we hear, and we hear from God different ways. So some people might hear a voice, you might see visions, something in the Bible might really stand out to you. You might get some kind of a conviction, or maybe actually it can even happen through others.
Yeah.
So I'm saying the word here, we're using the word here, but I think that's still quite limited.
It's a bit more like interact with, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. You said the word conviction there. I want to kind of ask you about, what do you mean by get a conviction?
Good question. So conviction, I think that's kind of when you feel compelled by something, you really think something, you feel something really strongly. So it might be that you think, I've got to do this, or I've got to say this. And sometimes there's no real reason behind it, but actually we can attribute to that to maybe God's talking to us. Someone once said to me that when the way that God speaks to us is through our mind. So actually when we get these thoughts in our head which just come out of nowhere, that can be hearing God as well. And I think these are just lots of I'm not saying that this is gospel truth, but this is just stuff that I've picked up along the way and stuff that we've heard along the way, really, from other people.
Yeah, I suppose it's important to kind of mention that. That's a good point to mention it. That's really what we're doing on these podcasts. It's not kind of like deeply backed by theology. I suppose it is from a lot from our experience. Like it's not.
We're not biblical scholars. We're just
that's it.
People getting together to talk through things of life.
Yeah. So, all right. So we've got those things. We can hear his voice. We can see visions. We can see stuff in the Bible and get that conviction. We can hear through others. There's loads of other ways as well. We can sense him. He can use our emotions as well. That's a bit of a trickier one, but I think certainly he can. So how do we know that it's him? Because, sometimes I'm walking along and I might just think something or have an idea, or I might just be reading a book or reading the Bible, or someone might be talking to me how do I know that it's him rather than anything else, or do I not?
I think that's one of the hardest things. I think when I think I've heard from God, that's the question that will always come into my mind. Is this God? Is it me? And then I can spend so much time considering it that if it was God, that the moment's passed.
And and we can easily miss things, can't we? We've got some stories we'll share later, I suppose, that might illustrate those a bit better.
I think one of the ways that I've really started to hear God it's by stepping out, really. And I think if you think you've heard God and you step out, you might get it wrong sometimes, but you might get it right at other times. And you start to learn his voice by doing. So the more you step into what you feel he's calling you to do, the more you'll learn his voice. And I think it's just something that you know, that you can feel. And I guess it sort of comes back to that thing that we were talking about earlier, Mike, about conviction, that the more we respond to him, the more we start to know his voice.
Yeah. Well, practicing, I guess.
Yeah.
And responsiveness, being ready to step out. It's interesting because often God will ask us to do things that perhaps aren't very easy or comfortable, or things that we would naturally normally do. So often that can be a little bit of an indication that perhaps it's not us thinking it. Oh, hang on, I wouldn't have normally thought that, or it certainly wouldn't be my natural inclination to do something like that. We didn't actually comment on the quality of the hummus. Can I just say at this point? I know it's like not a classic way of running it, but that is nice hummus.
Yeah,
I think so. What did you think?
I really enjoyed that. I prefer it to store-bought hummus.
Oh yeah, texture's just exquisite. It's lovely. It's not too garlicky as well, I find.
Oh, I love garlic.
Yeah, see, I quite like it in its place, but not too much in a mistake.
I hope to hear Dave.
I hope the
lettuce.
listeners heard that was epic. An epic lettuce crunch from
fresh lettuce,
Dave.
Guys. Jumping back and on that whole idea of hearing God and what if you get it wrong, I think that's okay, because as long as our hearts are in the right place, God's okay. I remember someone saying once that God's bigger than our ability to mess things up, and if we're really seeking after his kingdom, after his heart, he'll sort out any kind of mistakes we get ourselves into. So we don't want this to all be theory. Mike, do you want to tell us some stories?
Story time
with Mike and Rich.
Story time with Mike, Rich, and producer Dave. There's a few. It's interesting thinking of stories to share, really, because there's so many. And I suppose like the stories I'm going to tell are quite kind of big events, I suppose, or like quite memorable events. But actually hearing from God and interacting with God can be such just an everyday, all the time thing, that often the stories seem to kind of pale into the insignificance. I'll tell the one that always sticks in my mind as the big one for me first. So when I was kind of at secondary school, I reached a point in my life. I'd been a Christian. I'd given my life to Jesus from a young age. But it got to a point where I kind of was re-evaluating that, I guess, long story short, and was kind of thinking, well, my friends at school weren't really into Christianity and Jesus, and I was trying to share about the good news of Jesus with them. But at one point, it got to a point where it was much more that I wanted to kind of be accepted rather than step out and do those things that might jeopardize that. And so I was kind of thinking, okay, well, should I just can this whole following Jesus thing and just go and kind of hang out with my friends and just lead that kind of life instead with that kind of existence with that kind of purpose? And I remember that very clearly, exactly where I was, walking on the path, walking out of school. We were allowed to go out and get our lunch from the cafe down the road, and we were heading out on the path, and I was just thinking in my mind, walking along with my friends, I just thought, oh, maybe I'll just kind of sack it off. Maybe I'll just kind of hang out with these guys and just relax a bit and just kind of, I guess, take the easy life, I suppose I saw it as. And I just heard I remember it as an audible voice. Nobody else heard it because nobody else acknowledged it at all. But it was certainly like a crystal clear voice, if not in my ears, certainly in my mind, of God saying that, okay, but could you deny that I exist then? That was his question, which doesn't sound like a direct question to what I was thinking at the time. But I suppose in order for me to have said, I'm going to sack this off, and for me to be honest with myself, I would have to say that God doesn't exist, to be able to then say, well, I don't want to interact with him anymore. I don't want to follow him anymore. I'd have to deny that he existed, and he knew that about me. So he just asked that question. And so that was the stark reality for me at that point, was to actually make a decision. And I had to answer that voice and say whether I could deny he existed or not. The answer was no, I wouldn't be able to deny he existed, because I'd had so much experience and interaction with him up to that point, even, that denying that all that stuff happened would have been impossible for me. And so from that point on, things very much changed for me. The decisions I was making, the influences that I was deciding to allow to determine what choices I made, completely shifted, because I decided, well, no, I can't deny God doesn't exist. And because he exists, that is reason for my existence and reason for my choices and everything I would make after that point. So that was quite a big one for me. A life-changing one, really. I remember once a different story when I was with some friends in a pub, and I'm always quite keen to kind of share the message of Jesus and what's going on and find opportunities to do that. And the pub's a good a place as any to do that. And sitting there hanging out with my friends, and we were chatting away, and an opportunity came up. Someone started talking maybe about spirituality or something like that. And I thought, oh, great, this is an opportunity to talk about Jesus and my faith and how important that is to me, and share some good stuff with those guys about that. And I just heard a voice in my mind, just as I was about to talk. I had my mouth open, almost about to say the words, and I just heard in my mind, no, don't share at this point, just leave it. So what?
Don't share the gospel.
Don't share the gospel. Don't say anything about it. Just move on. I never before heard that prompt or since. And it's one of those ones that I've no idea why God didn't want me to speak about that at that point in time with that group of people. I shared with that group of people about my life and about Jesus in different ways at other points with all of those guys. But at that point, clearly he didn't want me to, so I don't know why. I don't suppose I'll ever know why.
That's really interesting, because I think a lot of the time when we think about God talking to us, it's about direction. It's him saying, do this, go here. But actually what he did there was he held you back. And it reminds me of in Acts where Paul said that the Holy Spirit wouldn't let them go to Asia. And I think it's different, the whole idea that God will tell us to not do something or to hold back.
Yeah. What's interesting about that story in Acts as well, I quite like that they're just getting on with it. I don't get the sense that they were told you need to go to. They were just cracking on with life. That was just their operational day-to-day stuff. They were just doing, they were being super active and just getting on with it. And so as a result, they could be easily directed. Why God let them get all the way to the border? That's what the story sounds like. It's like, we got all the way to the border, no, the way was shut off to us or whatever, or we couldn't go across the border. That's a lot of effort, especially in those days, travelling around.
Yeah.
Anyway.
They didn't get an Uber there, did they?
Yes. No, they didn't. Yeah. who knows why? That's the thing. Even in the Bible, it doesn't say why they weren't going in there.
When we talk about hearing God and things like this, a lot of the time we think of it as something for like within church, within Christian settings, but actually God wants to impact all areas of our lives. And I'll often ask God what I should be doing in terms of work. And there's been times where I've made actual decisions at work based on what I feel God is saying, because I've been praying about things. And there was one in particular where it paid off really well. And someone commented saying, "Oh, I've never done this thing this way before." And I thought, oh, that's it exactly, because I'm involving God in my workplace and he wants to be a part of that. He wants to be involved with that as well. So that's been really exciting. And I think with that, it just brings a whole new idea to what it is to be in a relationship with God. On the flip side, I was praying for someone that I know, and God he gave me I guess he kind of shared his heart with me, and I was just concerned for them in certain areas. And I went and I just shared these concerns with them, and then we just had this really real, really good conversation. And it's not as if they just became a Christian or anything, but actually we just managed to connect in a different way because of what I kind of felt that God had given me for them.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it is. It's exciting stuff.
And significant for the other person.
Yes.
Isn't it? That God would reach out like that and say some specific things through you. It's interesting hearing from other people, because I think when someone else is involved, you're like, oh, wow. It's not it literally isn't just a thought in my head. There's some clout behind this, because God's taken the effort, and this person's taken the effort to hear something about me and then tell me about it. Now, that's what always impacts me when someone brings something to me, when they've heard from God about that.
Like I was saying earlier, I think we're all designed to hear from God, and that goes for everybody. It's not just that certain people can hear from God. And I know in the Bible it talks about prophets who are people who are particularly gifted in hearing from God for people, for nations. But we are all designed to hear from him. And it's great because we have these stories where even our kids hear from God. There was one time where one of my kids had heard God calling his name, for example. And then he was saying once that he was really struggling in, I think it was a maths test, and he felt God just say something to him. And it wasn't as if he gave him the answer, but actually God speaking to him calmed him in that setting. I think it's just amazing that it's not even something just for adults.
Definitely. I think often kids can be almost open to hear it with fewer barriers and life experience that might harden us a bit to those different things. Like but I know what's going on here, or I've had these experiences, and just write things off. Whereas kids are just, everything goes almost, isn't it? So they can just hear so much more freely. I think so often without any kind of, it's not a big deal. It's like, oh, you say I can hear from God? Oh, okay, then I will. Yeah.
And I think one of the things is as well that we need to be sensitive to the Holy Spirit. Like you were saying, that how you almost audibly heard God. And that's great, but I don't think he always talks to us in that way. I think if you look at the story of Elijah, when I think was he in a cave, and then there was all of this, I can't quite remember the details.
Well, there was like an earthquake and
earthquake or big wind. Yeah. But then God's voice was in the whisper of the breeze. And I think that's how God speaks to us. I think he can be quite gentle when he speaks a lot. It's not to say that his words aren't powerful, but I think we need to kind of be sensitive to his Holy Spirit, and we need to be in a place where we're willing to hear from him.
Yeah, he's often very gentle with it. Sometimes he'll repeat himself to us over and again as well, won't he?
Yes.
So you'll get someone will say something, or could have been from God, and then you just kind of forget about it or write it off. And then you read something, and then another event happens or something like that. And that's again another clue that God's kind of not giving up on us, and not letting us just get on with it, and just kind of wanting to interact with us, pursuing us in that way. On that thing about kids hearing from God, can I tell another story?
Go for it.
From my life. So when I was in primary school, there was a lad there who was getting bullied. These things happen around and about the place, don't they? And I was part of it, so I was joining in. And I remember going to bed one night, and I don't know, I guess just thinking about the day or whatever else, and I just heard God's voice in my mind, or kind of got this thought in my mind of just, it was actually a feeling as well. I got a feeling as well, and it was God saying, "I love that boy who everyone's bullying," and just this sense of love and care, and then this almost in me, this kind of realization, oh wow, God feels that and cares so much about that lad, and I'm treating him like that, and joining with everyone else treating him like that. And I was horrified. I think I probably would have been about 10 or 11. And just, I remember at the time just bursting into tears, and my parents being like, what's wrong? What's happened? Like, there was nothing wrong in the room. And just telling them about it. And then again, that's that kind of thing you hear from God, that you can't not change how you are after that kind of scenario. Like, something shifts. And so again, it was another one of those watershed moments where I was like, okay, I'm going to make I've got no option really here. Once you see and hear and experience something like that, it's like, okay, I need to behave differently. Once you see and experience the love of God like that, for yourself or someone else. Long story short, I made friends with him after that point, and that was good. And then obviously we lost touch having left primary school, and then I just bumped into him. I don't know. A few years later, I guess we would have been about 13, 14 at this point. I was catching up with him. Oh, how you doing? What's going on? And he was like, oh, I've just joined this youth group. I gave my life to Jesus last week. I'm getting baptized next week.
Wow.
And I was just gobsmacked. I think, I would have shared with him a bit about my life, as you do with your mates at primary school. I don't specifically remember sharing the gospel with him, particularly things like that, but clearly God had that guy on his heart. And I suppose that was an utter privilege for me to even meet him again and get that catch up, because I think so often when we hear God and do things and respond to it, we never know what the outcome is, kind of what I was saying earlier.
Yeah.
You just do it and you're like, okay, let that one go off and do its thing, that action do its thing, and see what God does with it, or not see. And just, it's part of his plan for that person, and we don't get to see that play out, and why not, and what or why. But yeah, for that guy, I got the kind of privilege of knowing that he'd given his life to Jesus, which was incredible, really.
Yeah, that is nice. That is great.
God's finger on that guy, God's hand on his life.
And I think in that whole thing, you had the choice of obedience, really, as to whether you were going to do what God was challenging you to do or not.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the key things in the Christian walk, anyway, obedience. And I think when we're hearing from God, one of the things that, well, sometimes there's that question we were talking about earlier of, is this God, is it me? I think some of the ways that we can really be more certain that it's God is actually, first of all, whatever we're hearing should line up with what's in the Bible. It should line up with the character of God. And I'd always encourage people that if you're not sure, speak it through with people that people who are faithful to God, people you trust, people who are wise.
Yeah. I think I'm hearing this from God, but it sounds a bit interesting, or it might mean that I end up making these choices from it. What do you think?
Yeah.
It can be a sensible kind of opener for that one, can't it?
I think so, yeah. And yeah, I think it's great hearing God, and it's a journey and it's an adventure.
Not without risk.
No.
Must be said.
Yeah.
So I suppose in all of the kind of, a lot of the examples we've shared today, there's an element of risk in there. Not always, but sometimes it, as you said about obedience, doing these things can you can play it out in your mind and think, oh gosh, if I do that, then I don't know, I'm not going to have any friends, or I'm going to be doing things that are going to be harder or more tricky than if I just didn't do it, for example. Often with risk, and so that's where the kind of little clue might be that it could be God is like, okay, I wouldn't normally do this. This might be a bit outside of what I would naturally do and a bit uncomfortable and a bit risky. As you say, checking it through with friends and things when it's particularly like that can be a really handy thing to do. But that doesn't, just because it's a bit risky or scary, that doesn't mean, okay, well, I'll leave it then. That's where the obedience comes in, doesn't it?
It does.
It's like, actually, I'm going to do this against what my natural inclination might be. Yeah.
Great. So I hope you've enjoyed listening to us. If you have any questions, please get in contact. You can email us using info@richardandmike.com. Other than that, have a good time.
Enjoy.
Thanks for listening. As ever, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the chat today. Please get in touch with us on our site at www.richardandmike.com, that's with an AND in the middle, by email at info@richardandmike.com, and on Instagram with @richardandmike. Thanks again, see you next time.